Let's turn our Bibles to Matthew chapter 24. Jimmy got us to the end of Matthew 23, and he had been telling me that I was taking Matthew 24, and I thought it was just kind of a joke that we had until there was an announcement in class. I kind of half knew that you really meant for me to do it, but I'm glad for the opportunity. And what I want to do is to help you understand this chapter that intimidates a lot of people, confuses a lot of people, and I want to help you by giving you some keys to understand the whole thing. So I'm going to start with 4 keys to this chapter, and then if you have those, you can probably sort the rest of it out yourself. The first thing actually takes us to John. So right after I told you to turn to Matthew 24, I'm going to ask you to turn to John chapter 1. And the first key is that the temple pointed to Jesus. The temple was all about Jesus. In fact, all the Old Testament is about Jesus. And in John chapter 1, verse 14, we read that the Word became flesh and dwelled among us. Maybe you've heard before that that word dwelled literally means tabernacled. He tabernacled among us. And this becomes even clearer in the next chapter where he drives the money changers out of the temple. And then in chapter 2, verse 19, he says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" And then John says, "But he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken." So the first key to get in your mind before you approach Matthew chapter 24 is that the temple and Jesus are connected in very important ways, and that it was never really about the bricks and mortar. It was never really about what Solomon built and later what Zerubbabel and the returnees from exile built. All that time, it was always about Jesus. God lived in Jesus. Jesus came to earth, and He was the dwelling place of God among men. So you need to keep that in mind. Now, the second thing that you need to get into your mind are the questions at the beginning of Matthew 24. Now we go to the chapter. Now, Jimmy concluded chapter 23 with Jesus after these 7 woes to the scribes and Pharisees, mourning over what was going to come on Jerusalem. That's verses 37 to the end of the chapter, where he mourns the disaster that was going to come and leave Jerusalem desolate. So, the first of chapter 24, he leaves the temple and was going away, and the disciples pointed out to him the buildings of the temple. So they're still thinking this is all about the building. And he says, verse 2, "You see these? Do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." Now we get to their questions. After they get aside on the Mount of Olives and have some privacy with him and are able to speak with him privately, they ask 3 questions. This is very important as you come to verse 3. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, your first question, "Tell us, when will these things be?" What do they mean by these things? Think about what's just happened, what they just had been talking about. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple being made desolate. When will that happen? And number 2, what will be the sign of your coming? The word coming is translated from a Greek term, parousia, which has to do with the coming of a king. So you as the Messiah show yourself to the world. When is that going to happen? Give us a sign for that. And then 3, what will be the sign of the close of the age or the end of the age? It's very important that you note in verse 3, 3 questions. That's the second key. First key, Jesus is the temple. He's the focus of God's restoration and healing on earth. Key number 2, there are 3, not 1 question, asked at the beginning of this chapter. Key number 3 is that Jesus uses biblical code language to answer this question. This is what makes us uncomfortable with this chapter. But you have to understand that the people among whom this was written in the beginning were very comfortable with this kind of language. Sometimes it's called apocalyptic language. It was used a lot in times of persecution for the very reason that the persecutors couldn't understand it, so it kept them a little more out of trouble. Apocalyptic literature is very common in the Old Testament, and you're going to see a lot of references to apocalyptic books, especially the book of Daniel. But you have to know how to read it. And there are several things. I don't only have time to bring up one idea, and there's a couple of illustrations. I'm going to read you an excerpt here from D.R. Dungan's Hermeneutics. Hermeneutics means biblical interpretation. This is a textbook that we use a lot in Bible school. And listen to what he says. He said, type and antitype, those are symbols. Type and antitype are like 2 hills in a line, the smaller one being the nearer. There may be a long distance between the two, but they look as if they were one hill only. Hence, after one line of prophetic history is described, which runs through the type and antitype, it is in order for the prophet to return and bring forward another, but this makes him refer to the type immediately after mentioning the antitype. And he goes on. Now, get this picture in your mind. Let's say you're standing in a point and you can see 2 hills and they're in line with one another. The one in front is smaller than the one behind it. So you're seeing them both at the same time. And those are like the immediate fulfillment of the prophecy and the long-reaching future application of the prophecy. Prophets of the Bible often work with those 2 hills at the same time and will go back and forth between them. To them, it's the same hill, and it may have different applications, but they don't feel like they have to speak in a linear way the way we often do. We want to know beginning, middle, end. Conclusion, story over. They'll go back and forth, and you see this in Isaiah. People get mixed up on Isaiah, trying to make Isaiah chronological, and they'll trace out, well, first here is the Jews are going to return from captivity, and Israel will be rebuilt. And now we see the suffering servant, the Messiah, come and die for the sins of people, and he's going to bring salvation to all the people. And then we see a future restoration of Israel. No, he's going back to the smaller hill. I know I'm moving fast through this, but another illustration of the same concept that I got from N.T. Wright is of a score of music. Now, a composer, when he's putting together music for an orchestra, he will write each piece separately. He'll do the clarinets, and then the flutes, and then the trumpets, and then the strings. He'll do them all separate, all these separate pieces. And there'll be, if you see a score of music, you see one staff after another. When they're all played together, it's one piece of music. It's blended together. But you can pull those parts out, and in rehearsal they'll do this. Let's just hear the woodwinds on this. And you'll hear a piece of it. Let's just hear the trumpets on this. Let's just hear the strings. And you can pull those pieces out. Those are like the different applications of the prophecy. But the composer, the whole time in his mind, it's all one piece. Matthew 24 is all one piece, but it's jumping from one historical point to a future point. That's the third key, is we're reading the answer to these questions in biblical code. The fourth key is the hinge point of this chapter. Now, the first part of the chapter, I'm just going to tell you, is about the destruction of Jerusalem. the first question the disciples asked. The last part of the chapter is about the second coming of Christ, the second and third questions that the disciples asked. The hinge point for this is verse 34. Let's read it. He says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." So whatever he has said beforehand is going to happen within the lifetimes of the disciples to whom he's speaking. Then he says, "Heaven and earth will pass away, my words will not pass away." And then look at verse 36. "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only." Those three verses, 34 through 36, are key. That's the hinge in the chapter. Before them, you have the destruction of Jerusalem. After them, you have the second coming. So those are four keys. Let's see if I can remember them. Number one, Jesus is the true temple. Number two, there are three questions, not one, being answered in this chapter. Number three, Jesus answers it with biblical code language. They were familiar with it. We're not as familiar with it, so it makes it challenging. And number four, there's a hinge in this chapter, verses 34 through 36. Now, if you've got that in mind, you don't have to hear the rest of this. You can probably sort this out. You may still have some questions. I still have some questions. But you can sort the rest of it out. Now, let's back up and start with verse 4 and just look at some things that reinforce this idea that he is describing in predictive prophecy something's going to happen not millennia later, but decades later, there in the city of Jerusalem, and will lead to the destruction of the temple. A historical point for you to take note of. In the year 70 AD, the Roman Empire came into Jerusalem, commanded by the general Titus, destroyed the city of Jerusalem, and demolished the temple. And the only thing left today is what is known as the Western Wall. If you've seen the Jews praying at this wall, this old ancient wall, maybe writing prayers down and stuffing them into the cracks of the wall, that's all that's left after Rome got done with the temple. So that happened about 40 years after Jesus died on the cross. Now he catalogs events that would occur over those 40 years in verses 4 through 14. Look at these. "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, earthquakes." He says, these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Very common image in Scripture, a little pain that will bring forth something great. Usually something joyous. In this case, not so much. But he's saying these wars, these natural calamities, these things must take place. In addition to that, he mentions in verse 14, the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So, remember, two hills. We're looking at the first one, the destruction of Jerusalem, but you can see that that other one is looming over it. And so a lot of this imagery keeps that in mind as well. That's why he doesn't just say, these are the birth pains. He says, these are the beginning of the birth pains. People look today at this passage, they'll say, hey, we've got war in the Middle East. There's an earthquake over here. There's a typhoon over there. These are the signs we saw in Matthew 24. Those signs came in the 40 years leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem, and they occur now as well because we're still in the birth pains. The end has not yet come, but it's coming. Now, I'm having to skip a lot of stuff here. I want to make sure I get to the end of the chapter before my time is up. So let's go to verse 15, this phrase that people love to make a lot out of, the abomination of desolation. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. What is the abomination of desolation? Well, he tells you where he got it. He said, the prophet Daniel. So you go back to Daniel chapter 9. In Daniel 9:27, Daniel is predicting something that will occur after his time, and it's something that will be sacrilegious, something that will be blasphemous, something that will be an abomination. So it has a religious connotation to it in the negative sense. This almost happened in the year 40 AD when Caligula was planning to go into the temple in Jerusalem and put an image of himself, but he was a mess and he died before he was able to do it. 30 years after that, Titus led the Roman troops into Jerusalem and surrounded the temple with the stations of Rome and sacrilege and desecrated the temple. That was the holy place for the Jewish people in Israel. That is the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke of, and we see it playing out in history. Now, I want you to look at these. If you look at this and you interpret this in terms of something that still hasn't happened, like the second coming of Christ, look at the instructions that are given here beginning verse 16. Ask yourself, how would these help us when the world's coming to an end? How would these instructions make sense in the second coming? He says, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. Let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. Then there will be great tribulation. There's a word we've been conditioned to attach to end-time things, but the word tribulation means troublesome times, troublesome circumstances, hard times. There will be tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. What good does it do? Well, first of all, why identify Judea as the locality if we're talking about the second coming, which will be a global event? Every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, Revelation 1. Secondly, what good will it do you to go to the mountains or go up on the housetop or not go back and get your cloak? Why will you be thinking about your cloak when Jesus comes back? Why is it worse for pregnant women than for those who are not with child? Why is he concerned about that? He goes on, verse 23. If anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. False Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. I've told you beforehand, if they say to you, look, he's in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. As the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Now, the coming of the Son of Man throws us off because we use it almost exclusively to talk about the end of time. But you'll see throughout the Old and New Testaments, the coming of the Lord, the day of the Lord, things like that applied to other big events, life-changing events, big historical moments. And this is being applied to the destruction of Jerusalem. Verse 28 is interesting. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. In the Roman mind and in the ancient mind, there wasn't a huge difference between an eagle and a buzzard. Now today we make a big difference between them. The bald eagle is the symbol of our nation. Turkey buzzard is about the sickest thing you can see, right? But in their mind, they're birds of prey. They eat meat. Eagle, vulture, what's the difference? What's really interesting is, you know what the Romans had emblazoned on their stations and their flags? Eagles. And whenever they conquered a place, they would put their flags with the eagles all the way around the borders. And so picture that. Roman flags with eagles emblazoned on them surrounding a city that is dying. That's the corpse. The corpse is the temple in the city of Jerusalem. And why would God do this? Well, His people were disobedient, but also because Jesus had come, and He is the temple. It's hard for us to understand that God would orchestrate something like this or let something like this happen until you realize that Jesus is what it's all about. The temple was pointing at Him. He is the dwelling place of God. Verses 29 through 31. Man, I'm moving so fast here. But these are some of that biblical code. You see this kind of language in Isaiah, you see it in Ezekiel, and it's usually used in terms of kingdoms being toppled. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. This is not to be read literally. This is figurative language, and His disciples would have understood that. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And you immediately think second coming, right? But He's talking about Daniel. Now go back to Daniel 7. I want you to notice this. This is the Son of Man messianic prophecy. And Ezekiel is called the Son of Man, but not in a messianic way. In Daniel, you have the only Son of Man messianic prophecy. Daniel chapter 7, beginning verse 13. Behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And He came to what? He came to the Ancient of Days. Who's the Ancient of Days? God. Where is God? He's in heaven. So if the Son of Man is coming to the Ancient of Days, is He going down or is He going up? He's ascending upward, right? So Daniel 7 is written from the perspective of heaven, looking down. And if you use that to interpret Matthew 24, what you're reading about is not the coming of Christ to earth, but the Son of Man coming to the Father in heaven, which happened when? After the resurrection, He ascended to heaven, right? And so this is what He's talking about. And there will be a gathering, a harvest, a reaping as the world is evangelized and the message of the gospel is spread throughout the whole world. I'm going to have to get quickly to the second part. I've already told you about the hinge point, verses 32 through 36. Notice what He says again. Verse 34, all this will occur in your lifetimes. 2,000 years ago, He said that. Now He says, verse 36, but concerning that day and hour, no one knows. He's turning to another question. They said, when will the temple be destroyed? He's answered that. I'll give you a few signs. Now, what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? He's going to address those two questions together because they happen at the same time. When Jesus comes, it will be the end of this dispensation. It will be the end of the world, the end of this age. And so He says, concerning verse 36, that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Jesus said, I don't even know. So how would He give them signs of His coming if He didn't know when it was? And what He's telling them, the rest of this is all about being prepared. And this is where we can take something practical from it. Watch for it. It's coming. You need to live your life as if it could come any moment now. Always be ready. He compares it to the days of Noah. In those days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then He gets into this, and I wanted to address this because a lot of people think this is rapture language. But look at it, verse 40. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Our minds are conditioned by a lot of books and movies and teaching that we've had through the years that when Jesus returns, you're going to be sitting next to a righteous person and poof, gone. And planes will be falling out of the sky because Christian pilots have disappeared, and all this stuff will happen. And they think these two verses are talking about that. But what you need to understand is he's talking about a gathering up, sure. But then he's also, when he says one's left, we've got in our mind left behind. Oh, I've read those books. I've seen those movies. But the word left here means, it comes from the same word we get our word forgive from, aphiami. Aphiami means to disregard, to send away. When you forgive a sin, what do you do with that sin? You treat it as if it had never existed. You disregard that sin. You send it away. That's the language he's using here when he says one is left. He's saying there will be two kinds of people at the end of time. There will be those who will be gathered up by me, and then there will be those who will be disregarded, sent away. And it will come suddenly. Just one day, there will be this parting. The next chapter he talks about the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne. He'll put the goats on his left and the sheep on his right. That's what you're seeing here in verses 40 and 41. There's some more interesting things to talk about there, but I need to wrap this up. He says, verse 44, he repeats, the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So what do? Verse 45. Who is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is the servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. In other words, blessed is the one who's doing the will of the Father when Jesus returns. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. If that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You get the picture. He wouldn't be saying these things if his coming was right around the corner. There was a lot of excitement after the resurrection and the ascension, as you would expect. But there would be decades, and now we know centuries and millennia. All this time for people to start saying, it's been a long time. Christ hasn't returned. The Master is delayed. Maybe he's not coming back. Decades later, Peter would deal with that in 2 Peter chapter 3. And Peter just says, remember the flood. And he must have been thinking about this discourse on the Mount of Olives when Jesus said, it'll be like in the days of Noah. People were eating and drinking, not thinking about the end, not thinking about judgment. And suddenly, here comes the water to destroy the earth. Peter in 2 Peter 3 reminds us of that. And then Peter gives us a reason why Jesus is delaying his coming. In verse 9, now I'll end with this. The Lord is not slow concerning his promises, some count slowness, but is patient toward us, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. And he's waiting on us to repent and giving us time in his graciousness. So I hope if you take those 4 keys, maybe that'll help you in interpreting this. Sorry I couldn't get to every little detail. It's a long chapter, but I appreciate your patience with me tonight.